A winter night in 1971 carried a silence so dense that it felt almost deliberate, as if the world was preparing itself for an anomaly it could not predict. On that night, a man stepped onto a Boeing 727 with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the fragility of order. Hours later, he would fracture that order completely. What began as an ordinary flight became the origin of one of America's most enduring mysteries, defined not by violence, but by precision, control, and an unsettling calm. The story of D.B. Cooper is more than a cold case. It is a descent into a shadowed corner of history where certainty dissolves, leaving only speculation and unanswered questions. Tonight, we explore the man who jumped into the void and was never seen again. The early 1970s in America carried an atmosphere that felt both exhausted and volatile. A nation still trembling beneath the weight of a war that had fractured trust and redirected the country's understanding of danger. Airports were open, casual spaces then, lacking the rigid frameworks that would later define modern security. In their place was a landscape shaped by uncertainty and muted fear, where the quiet movements of strangers in terminals, motels, and roadside diners often hid intentions that would never be fully understood. The country lived in a haze of transition, and that haze settled heavily over the Pacific Northwest. Beneath the surface of daily travel routines, a darker vibration ran through the aviation world. Flights that once symbolized ease and movement now held the potential for disruption, because the cracks in security created shadows where danger could grow unnoticed. The decade was marked by a rising wave of hijackings acts that drew little glamour but carried the unsettling reminder that the thin line between order and chaos could be broken by a single calm voice or a folded note on a tray table. Into this fragile environment, an unusual presence would soon emerge. The victim was never a single person. The true target was the fragile system of air travel, built on trust, routine, and untested assumptions. Pilots, flight attendants, and passengers alike became collateral in a crime that shattered convention. Years later, trauma lingered, manifesting as unease, hypervigilance, or the haunting memory of that night when the certainty of flight abruptly vanished. Tina Mucklow, a young flight attendant, lived a life of order and simplicity, centered on work, family, and quiet security. Known for her gentle yet capable nature, she brought calm and reassurance to travelers, finding purpose in helping others. Her days were predictable, defined by stability. Nothing hinted that she would become the key witness to one of America's most mysterious criminals. Yet, during that fateful flight, her composed voice and steady presence would become crucial in navigating the tense, uncertain hours aboard the plane. She did not realize that the man who took a seat behind her crew station would become a figure whose shadow stretched across decades. Her interactions with him were polite at first, marked by the professionalism she carried naturally, never knowing that she was speaking to someone who had entered the flight, not as a traveler, but as a catalyst for an event that would reshape the future of aviation. Tina's calmness that evening was not a performance. It was a coping mechanism for a situation she could not fully comprehend until much later. The man at the center of this mystery introduced himself not through words, but through presence. He was between 40 and 50 years old, dressed with deliberate precision: a black suit, dark tie, white shirt, and a pair of sunglasses that obscured the windows into his intentions. He blended into the cabin with such ease that he almost disappeared among the passengers. Yet there was something about him that resisted anonymity. The stillness he carried felt intentional, as if he was conserving energy for a moment that had not yet arrived. His psychological profile remains one of the most enigmatic aspects of the case. His posture conveyed confidence without the slightest hint of arrogance, calm, anchored not in dominance, but in deliberate calculation. He appeared to understand his inner landscape with unsettling clarity, knowing precisely which emotions to reveal and which to bury. There were no signs of nerves, no fidgeting, no hesitation. Instead, he radiated a quiet indifference to consequence, the kind often forged through military discipline or lives shaped in environments where composure meant survival. The absence of fear in his demeanor was more disturbing than any overt display of menace, Many have speculated that he was someone accustomed to structure and risk, someone who had learned to navigate tension without drawing attention. His ability to remain unremarkable in a moment of extraordinary pressure suggested a practiced detachment, the kind found in individuals touched by trauma, intense training, or experiences that taught them emotions were liabilities, whether driven by desperation, ideology, or a private reckoning. His resolve seemed fixed long before he stepped onto the aircraft. The corridor between Seattle and Portland served as more than a backdrop. In the early 1970s, the Pacific Northwest was a land of dense forests, cold rain, and towns caught between fading industries and rising uncertainty. It was a region of wanderers, veterans, laborers, drifters seeking opportunity or anonymity. Beneath its fog and towering evergreens stretched landscapes capable of swallowing a secret whole, vast enough for a single man to vanish and re-emerge as legend. Airports across the Pacific Northwest were modest but constantly moving small crossroads where people drifted between cities for work, family, obligation, or quiet escape. No one imagined that these unremarkable terminals, often forgotten as soon as travelers stepped outside, would soon anchor one of the most perplexing cases in aviation history. The skies above this region had always been predictable lanes of commerce, yet beneath their calm surface lay an immense wilderness capable of swallowing anything that fell into it. Darkness, mountains, rivers, and endless forests formed a natural veil one that could hide a man forever. On that evening, as the Boeing 727 prepared for departure, the passengers felt nothing unusual. The cabin echoed with the familiar rhythms of travel, seats clicking upright, bags thudding into overhead bins, engines rising to a confident hum. But behind that ordinary atmosphere, a quiet fracture had already taken shape. A man with no visible anger and no visible motive sat silently, carrying a purpose known only to himself. The Pacific Northwest had seen countless storms and disappearances, but that night it carried something different. When the aircraft lifted into the sky between Seattle and Portland, it unknowingly began a story that would echo across generations because the man on board was seconds away from reshaping history. In the hours before the hijacking unfolded, everything about the day appeared unremarkable in the way that only the most significant days. CANDB Cooper arrived at the Portland International Airport carrying no visible luggage and purchased his ticket with quiet efficiency. The exchange took only seconds, paid entirely in cash, a method that blended seamlessly into an era far less suspicious of anonymity. Yet the clerk later remembered an uneasy impression, something in Cooper's gaze that felt too focused, too deliberate, as if he were studying the world rather than participating in it. His movements through the terminal were measured, almost serene. He did not hurry or hesitate. Instead, he behaved like someone who understood timing more deeply than the average Tina Maklo, unaware of what awaited her later, passed by him briefly during pre-boarding preparations. She registered nothing abnormal, yet she would later recall a distinct stillness around him, the kind of silence that does not simply fill space but absorbs it. That silence, though unnoticed by others, was already a warning whispered beneath the noise of the airport. Before boarding, Cooper gave no hint of danger, no coded messages, no odd behavior, only an unusual calm. Psychologically, such absence of signs can be most telling. While ordinary travelers reveal subtle distractions or fatigue, Cooper remained focused, his mind fixed on a plan set long before he entered the terminal. He embodied the quiet before a storm and impending chaos only he fully understood. As the aircraft rose from Portland, the evening sky thickened with early winter darkness. The passengers settled into their routines, unaware that the man seated among them carried intentions far larger than the tidy briefcase on his lap. At 7:40 p.m., the shift occurred. Cooper handed a folded note to a flight attendant, an action so mundane that she initially ignored it. It was only when he spoke softly, instructing her to read it, that the tone of the flight transformed. The note contained a simple declaration. He possessed a bomb. There was no spectacle, only the cool certainty of a man who knew exactly what power silence could hold. His demands were specific and had the clarity of a plan refined over a long period. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a refueled aircraft capable of reaching Mexico City. The details were not extravagant. They were functional. In psychology, such precision signifies a goal-oriented mindset, suggesting that the crime was not driven by impulse or chaos, but by structure and restraint. The absence of erratic behavior distinguished him from many hijackers of the era. He did not threaten for attention. He maneuvered with intention. As the crew relayed the demands, the mood inside the cabin shifted into a tense but quiet suspension. Cooper remained composed, never raising his voice, never accelerating the atmosphere toward panic. For Tina, the proximity to him turned into a surreal test of her training. She observed him closely, noting his controlled breathing and steady tone. His calmness was unnerving because it implied preparation, not desperation. He appeared to understand psychological leverage, recognizing that fear delivered in a whisper can be more powerful than fear delivered in a shout. When the aircraft landed in Seattle to retrieve the money and parachutes, Cooper kept his word with an almost methodical consistency. He released the passengers and most of the crew without hesitation. His behavior was not that of a man craving harm, but of one managing variables. He allowed the process to unfold with a patience that defied typical criminal urgency. This restraint suggested he was not performing for anyone. He was enacting a plan he had already accepted the consequences of, whatever they might be. Once the plane was refueled and airborne again, heading south into a night stripped of moonlight, the atmosphere inside the cabin thickened into near silence. Only the flight crew and Tina remained aboard, and Cooper retreated toward the rear staircase, maintaining his impenetrable composure. At 8:13 p.m., the pilots felt a sudden but subtle shift in the aircraft. A swata jolt so slight that under any other circumstance it might have been dismissed as turbulence. Instead, it became the symbolic moment that echoed through decades. Cooper had likely stepped into the void. There were no cameras, no witnesses, no radar tracking a falling figure. The darkness outside was absolute, swallowing everything beyond the aircraft's narrow windows. The Pacific Northwest forest below stretched endlessly, a mosaic of shadows, rivers, and mountains capable of hiding a man forever. The world would never know whether Cooper landed intact, whether he disappeared on impact, or whether he had help waiting among the trees. As investigators began their search, the landscape revealed nothing. What had emerged, however, was a strange inconsistency in the evidence. Reports from the crew contained small contradictions, details about the timing, the manner of Cooper's movements, or the exact sequence of events. Some items that should have been documented could not be found. A few objects were inexplicably missing or misclassified. These discrepancies were not dramatic enough to prove tampering but troubling enough to raise questions. They hinted at either human error under pressure or the possibility that the event was more layered than it initially appeared. The deeper the investigators looked, the more unsettling the puzzle became. Was this simply a hijacking executed with rare control? Or was it the visible surface of a larger operation? The idea that Cooper acted alone was logical yet oddly incomplete. His precision, his composure, and the vanishing trail suggested a mind operating within a broader structure or perhaps a philosophy that embraced disappearance as liberation rather than escape. As night fell over the Northwest, it became clear that what descended from the sky was more than a manet, was a disciplined, silent mystery. The world saw a crime and something stranger, a figure crossing an unseen threshold. What followed was pursuit, speculation, and the sense that the story had only begun. The manhunt began that very night, and it would grow into one of the costliest, longest-running, and most bewildering operations in FBI history. No one expected that a stranger with a cheap tie and eyes as cold as the air at 10,000 feet could force the U.S. government to chase his shadow for decades. Moments after the Boeing 727 landed, the FBI sealed off the entire area. Dozens of investigators were deployed overnight. Within hours, hundreds of police officers, military personnel, and search and rescue teams flooded the dense forests of southwest Washington, the presumed landing zone of the mysterious man. But everything quickly became meaningless. They searched the wilderness, waded through icy streams, and flew helicopters over every stretch of unforgiving terrain. Yet there was no footprint, no parachute fragment, No more torn fabric, nothing to prove that anyone had ever reached the ground. And stranger still, several important details from the crew details that should have helped were dismissed early on. For example, a flight attendant recalled a sudden gust of wind entering the rear cabin earlier than the official time. The co-pilot insisted the aircraft had shifted altitude twice, not just once. Meanwhile, a passenger from the previous flight reported seeing Cooper examine a part of the plane no one else seemed to notice. These small puzzle pieces were quietly pushed aside, lost in the shuffle of the investigation. The FBI interrogated dozens of men who matched the basic description: white, possibly with military experience or skilled in parachuting. Some suspects were held for hours, even days. Each time they thought they had the most likely person, a crucial detail fell apart: height, voice, skill level, alibi. No one matched perfectly. Cooper began to feel less like a real man, and more like a silhouette stitched together from scattered memories. When the story leaked, the media erupted. Newspapers raced to print the name D.B. Cooper, a misstep derived from the ticket name Don Cooper. That small error became legendary. The image of a sharply dressed man in a suit and sunglasses calmly hijacking a plane, then leaping into the night with $200,000, captured the nation's imagination. Journalists mapped theories, drew sketches, analyzed his psychology, and produced endless speculation. Talk shows discussed him weekly. Children played Cooper parachute at school. Adventurers and amateur sleuths debated whether anyone could survive such a jump. Hunting for clues in forests and rivers. Public opinion quickly split into three camps. Those convinced Cooper survived, enjoying freedom with his loot somewhere. Those certain he died, buried beneath snow or rock. And those who suspected a deeper conspiracy, that Cooper had not acted alone. Each group clung to its own version of the story, fueling fascination that has lasted for decades. Amid the media frenzy, the flight crew's families bore the heaviest burden. Reporters followed them relentlessly, probing for any scrap of new information. Every detail of their lives was dissected and analyzed, their privacy shattered by the public's insatiable curiosity. Many faced unfair criticism. Why didn't you notice? Why didn't you react? Why did you allow it to happen? The weight of these questions, though unjust, pressed heavily on shoulders already strained by shock and uncertainty. Yet the truth was far simpler and far more human. In that moment, high above the darkness, under the tense hum of engines and the quiet terror of the unknown, there was nothing they could have done. The crew acted as best they could, guided by training and instinct, navigating a situation that no protocol could fully anticipate. Their courage and composure became a quiet, invisible anchor amidst the chaos, even as public opinion turned and twisted around them. As the investigation dragged on with months of dead ends, theories began to take shape. Patterns were observed, possibilities debated, and speculation ran rampant. Three major explanations surfaced, each grounded in logic, yet wild enough to keep the story alive in the public imagination. These theories would dominate discussions for decades, fueling obsession, argument, and fascination, ensuring that the mystery of that night would endure far beyond the flight itself. Theory A: Cooper was a former paratrooper. The most widely accepted theory is that Cooper knew the Boeing 727 intimately: the aft stairs, the safe jump altitude, the tail cone airflow. He requested specific parachutes with particular straps and features, and his unnervingly calm demeanor suggested he was no amateur. Many speculated he was a former military paratrooper, perhaps from special units in World War II or the Korean War, capable of surviving harsh wilderness conditions. Some believed he even had accomplices waiting on the ground. Yet the greatest mystery remains: if he survived, why was he never seen again? Theory B: the hijacking was staged. The hijacking unfolded with eerie smoothness: no shots fired, no injuries, no amateur mistakes, and no sign of panic. Cooper's calm/calculated actions suggested a level of planning that went far beyond ordinary criminal behavior. Some investigators theorized he wasn't alone. Perhaps an accomplice waited on the ground, or even someone on the crew had a hidden role. This idea could explain missing evidence, contradictions in testimony, and why the FBI initially overlooked key details. If it was staged, someone on that plane knew far more than they ever admitted. Theory C. Cooper was someone else entirely. The strangest and least discussed, theory suggests Cooper never jumped. Some experts argued he may have hidden somewhere on the aircraft, changed clothes, used an alternate exit, or slipped away during the refueling stop. It sounds incredible, yet the timing, his seat location, and his calm control hint he might have done something no one imagined. If he didn't jump, what caused the light jolt at 8:13 p.m.? And if he stayed on the plane, where could he have gone? Every theory seemed plausible, yet each had holes large enough to swallow the entire case. Was Cooper a seasoned soldier, part of a larger operation, or a ghost vanishing where no one expected? Just when the investigation seemed frozen, a new discovery surfaced, one that shattered everything the FBI believed. Long before investigators traced footprints or tracked ransom bills, one truth stood out. The real mystery of D.B. Cooper wasn't the jump, the money, or missing evidence. It was the mind behind it all. Cooper's intellect and composure defied categorization, even by seasoned behavioral profiling and comparisons with hijackers, soldiers, and career criminals offered only partial insights. What emerged was a figure unlike any known criminal. He moved with extraordinary calm, spoke clearly, never raised his voice, and never threatened needlessly. Every action suggested a meticulously planned script, executed with precision. Psychologists called it a killer's mindset, without the killing absolute focus, emotional detachment, and total control. Cooper wasn't violent. He was inevitable. Some experts likened his demeanor to stoicism, fear as perception, mastery over response, and complete acceptance of fate before it arrived. Viewed through this lens, Cooper behaved like a stoic practitioner performing his final act. He let go of panic, controlled only what he could, and accepted the outcome before it arrived. He seemed to have made peace with the possibility of death, moving with a freedom no ordinary criminal could possess. From another perspective, Cooper resembled a figure in Buddhist teachings, a man who had abandoned worldly attachments. He left behind his name, his past, and any predictable future. The jump into the night was not merely physical. It was symbolic, a severing of identity, as if he were a monk shedding all possessions. To some investigators, it seemed Cooper wasn't running from life. He was stepping entirely out of it. He didn't just jump from a plane. He jumped away from the story he once inhabited. The strangest aspect of his behavior was his lack of clinging. Most criminals err because they hold on to money, ego, or a previous life. Cooper clung to nothing. His composure was his camouflage, and it allowed him to operate beyond ordinary human limits. Decades passed. Files thickened, and witness memories faded. Yet the psychological profile left one haunting conclusion. Cooper acted like a man familiar with the forests and mountains below, not someone parachuting blindly into unknown terrain. This raised a long-avoided question. Was there a network waiting for him? In the early 1970s, the Pacific Northwest had pockets of underground communities, survivalists, ex-military enclaves, off-the-grid individuals. Some were ideological, some criminal, others simply people wanting to vanish from society. If Cooper had ties to such groups, it explained much. His confidence made sense, his disappearance became plausible, and the lack of evidence became expected. A man who knows the land does not vanish by accident. He vanishes by design. FBI archives reveal that leads pointing to potential networks or preparation were often overlooked or deprioritized, perhaps deemed too elaborate or improbable. Yet in hindsight, this may have been the only avenue with real substance. Cooper didn't act like a rogue amateur. He moved like someone stepping into familiar darkness. The case became legendary not because evidence vanished, but because he left just enough to provoke pursuit while leaving no trace. A vanishing man is untrackable precisely because his disappearance is intentional. While Cooper became myth, his act forced the world to change. Though no lives were lost, the hijacking reshaped American aviation, reinforced cockpit doors, mandatory luggage checks, metal detectors, structural aircraft modifications, and stricter crew protocols. The Cooper van installed on Boeing 727 rear staircases, was designed solely to prevent a repeat of his daring escape. The people aboard Flight 305 carried the impact personally, and long after the flight, crew members developed anxiety that lingered for years. Several avoided the media entirely, exhausted by reporters who treated them like evidence rather than human beings. Passengers who merely shared the cabin with Cooper found their ordinary travel experiences permanently overshadowed by that night, a constant reminder of unresolved mystery. Cooper walked away clean. Everyone else bore the psychological bill. Amid the media frenzy, the flight crew's families bore the greatest burden. Reporters pursued them relentlessly, seeking any detail, while many faced unfair questions. Why didn't you notice or act? The truth was far simpler. High above the darkness, under tense fear, there was nothing they could do. Guided by training and instinct, they managed the situation as best they could, navigating a scenario no protocol or preparation could fully anticipate. As the investigation dragged on, several theories emerged, each plausible, each with fatal gaps. The most widely accepted theory proposed that Cooper was a former military paratrooper, familiar with the Boeing 727, the aft stairs, safe jump altitude, and tailcone airflow. He requested specific parachutes and maintained unnerving composure, suggesting expert preparation. Some speculated he had accomplices waiting on the ground, but if he survived, why was he never seen again? Another theory suggested he wasn't acting alone on the plane. Perhaps an accomplice was hidden among the crew, explaining missing evidence, contradictions in testimony, and early investigative oversights. If the hijacking had been staged, someone aboard Flight 305 knew far more than they ever admitted. The most unusual theory proposed that Cooper never jumped. Some experts argued he might have hidden somewhere on the aircraft, changed clothes, or slipped away during the refueling stop. Timing, seat location, and composure all hinted at a possibility no one had imagined. If he didn't jump, what caused the light jolt at 8:13 p.m.? And if he remained on the plane, where did he go? Every theory made sense in parts and failed in others. When the story leaked, public fascination exploded. The misprinted name D.B. Cooper became legendary, and the image of a sharply dressed man calmly hijacking a plane and vanishing into the night captured millions. Journalists theorized, sketched faces, and analyzed his psychology. Talk shows debated him. Children played Cooper parachute, and adventurers pondered surviving such a jump. Society split. Some believed he survived, others that he died, and some suspected a larger conspiracy. Cooper's story challenges more than crime. It exposes the fragility of safety, proving that a prepared, fearless individual could slip entirely outside the grid. More than 50 years have passed, yet D.B. Cooper remains an enigma, a shadow suspended in history, reminding us that the world still contains spaces where a person can vanish with a single choice. His story challenges us to reflect. If fear is a mirror, what does it reveal about ourselves? Was Cooper a criminal genius, a product of his time, or simply a symbol of the unanswered questions that haunt us? His disappearance has inspired endless speculation, debate, and fascination. Some see him as a master planner, others as a ghost slipping through the cracks of society. Whatever the truth, his legacy endures not in the money or the crime itself, but in the mystery, the questions, and the lessons about human ingenuity and the fragility of our sense of control. If you have your own thoughts, share them below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Criminal Minds. Some crimes leave no screams. Only echoes, and Cooper's silence speaks louder than any confession.